Welcome to the store. Don't forget to subscribe, and support me.
The wind howled across the desolate expanse of the endless ocean, its salty tang mingling with the scent of forgotten ages. Layla stood on the craggy cliffs of her island, the last rays of the setting sun casting long shadows across her face. The sea stretched before her, an unbroken horizon that had held her people prisoner for thousands of years. She had heard the tales all her life, how the ocean teemed with monsters so vast and powerful they could crush ships in a single bite. For generations, humanity had cowered on these scattered islands, bound by fear and superstition, but Layla was not like the others. She refused to believe that this was how their story had to end. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the legendary Lost Continent, a place untouched by time, filled with ancient magic and the promise of a future. A future free from the tyranny of the ocean's creatures. She felt it in her bones, a pull that had driven her to study the forgotten texts and the myths that most dismissed as mere stories. Her mentor, Eamon, had once been the island's most skilled sailor before the sea monsters had driven him to the safety of land for good. He was old now, his hands worn from years of sailing and later from poring over the same crumbling manuscripts Layla had taken up. But while others gave up hope, Eamon had shared with Layla the most precious secret of all, an ancient diagram, hidden for centuries in the depths of the island's ruined temple. It was a blueprint for a ship unlike any that had sailed these waters for millennia. A ship that could navigate the treacherous, monster-infested seas. "We won't be prisoners forever," Eamon had told her one stormy night as they huddled over the fragile parchment, tracing the intricate lines with trembling fingers. The world wasn't always this way. There was a time when humanity ruled the seas, not the monsters. And there will be a time again. Layla believed him. She had to. There was no other choice. The island was dying. Every season, fewer crops grew in the rocky soil. The islanders were losing hope, and Layla knew it wouldn't be long before they gave up entirely, content to live out their days in quiet despair. But she couldn't let that happen. The ocean wasn't their enemy, it was their path forward. The next morning, Layla and a small crew of trusted friends began the construction of the ship. It was an arduous task, made more difficult by the limited resources available on the island. The wood was scavenged from the ruins of old shipwrecks, the iron repurposed from broken weapons and tools. But they worked tirelessly, driven by a shared dream of escape and discovery. Eamon oversaw every detail, his eyes sharper than his age should have allowed. His mind was still as sharp as ever, guiding them through the complex process of infusing the ship with the magic needed to protect it from the monsters that roamed the waters. The ship, once complete, would not be just a vessel but a living thing, imbued with the ancient spells that could bend the ocean's magic to their will. As the weeks passed, the ship began to take shape. It was larger than any they had ever built, with sails woven from enchanted silk that shimmered in the sunlight. The hull was reinforced with ironwood, a material thought to be extinct, but they had found a small grove hidden deep in the island's forests. Every plank, every nail, was carefully chosen and placed, ensuring the ship's strength and durability. Finally, after months of labor, the ship was complete. They named her the Sea Breaker, a tribute to their defiance of the ocean's monsters and the barriers that had kept them captive for so long. Layla stood at the helm on the morning of their departure, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The entire island had gathered to witness their departure, some cheering them on, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Most had long since accepted their fate, but Layla's crew had not. They were the brave few who still believed in the possibility of something more. As they set sail, the wind caught the enchanted sails, propelling them forward into the unknown. Layla felt the weight of the ocean's vastness pressing down on her, but she refused to waver. She had studied the maps, she had learned the secrets of the ship, and she had prepared for this moment her entire life. The sea stretched out before them like an endless, shifting landscape, its dark waters hiding countless dangers. For days, they sailed without incident, the calm seas lulling them into a false sense of security. But on the fourth day, the ocean's true nature revealed itself. The abyss serpent struck without warning. It rose from the depths, its massive body coiling around the ship like a monstrous snake. Its scales shimmered in the dim light, a deep, iridescent blue that blended seamlessly with the water. The creature's eyes, cold and calculating, glared at them as it tightened its grip, threatening to crush the ship. Layla's crew sprang into action, using the ship's magical defenses to fight back. Aemon had prepared them for this, and the ship responded as if it were alive. The enchanted sails glowed with a brilliant light, sending waves of energy pulsing through the air. The abyss serpent recoiled, its grip loosening just enough for the sea breaker to maneuver out of its grasp. "Hold steady," Layla shouted, gripping the helm with all her strength as the ship veered to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's massive jaws. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the serpent striking again and again, each time testing the ship's defenses. But Layla's crew was prepared. They had trained for this moment, and they fought with everything they had. With a final surge of power, the ship unleashed a blast of energy from its enchanted figurehead, striking the serpent directly in its heart. The creature let out a deafening roar, its body writhing in agony before it sank back into the depths, leaving nothing but a trail of blood and churned water in its wake. Breathless and battered, Layla and her crew stood victorious. But the battle had taken its toll. The ship, though still seaworthy, had suffered damage, and the crew was exhausted. They had survived their first encounter with the ocean's monsters, but they knew it wouldn't be their last. "We'll make repairs," Aemon said, his voice steady despite the weariness in his eyes. "But we need to keep moving. The farther we go, the closer we get to our goal." Layla nodded, her resolve unwavering. The lost continent was out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, and she would stop at nothing to find it. The days that followed were filled with a tense calm. The ocean seemed to lull them into a false sense of security once again, but Layla knew better than to let her guard down. The sea was a living thing, and it had ways of testing those who dared to venture into its depths. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the call of the ocean began. It was subtle at first, a distant, haunting melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Layla's crew heard it too, their expressions shifting from confusion to fear. Some of them murmured in hushed tones, talking of old superstitions and ghost stories passed down through the generations. The call was said to lure sailors to their deaths, drawing them into the depths where the monsters awaited. But for Layla, the sound was different. It wasn't frightening, it was beautiful. Mesmerizing. It pulled at something deep within her, a connection she couldn't explain. The melody wrapped around her, beckoning her to follow, to discover its source. "We need to stay focused," Layla said, trying to shake off the feeling. "The call is just another challenge. We're here to find the lost continent, not get distracted by the ocean's tricks." But as the nights wore on, the call grew stronger. It seeped into their dreams, filling their minds with visions of distant shores and ancient cities, of a time when humanity had ruled the seas. Layla's resolve began to waver, and she found herself questioning whether the lost continent was real, or if it was just another myth like the ones the call whispered to her in her sleep. The call continued to echo through the nights, filling the air with a haunting beauty that seemed to resonate in Layla's bones. Each evening it grew louder, more insistent, tugging at her thoughts even as she tried to focus on their mission. The others had started to show signs of wear, their nerves frayed, their patience thinning. Jorin, usually so steadfast, had begun to mutter about the dangers of following the call too far. He argued that perhaps they should turn back, return to the islands before the ocean claimed them all, but Layla couldn't. Something deep inside her told her they were close. She had spent too many years dreaming of this journey, too many nights staring at the horizon, imagining the lost continent. And now, here she was, on the brink of discovering it. She had to believe that all the suffering, the sacrifice, would be worth it. On the 12th night, the call became almost unbearable. Layla stood alone at the helm, her eyes fixed on the stars above. The wind had died, leaving the ship to drift in the stillness. The crew was quiet below deck, though she knew they wouldn't sleep. None of them had slept much since the call had started. It was as if the ocean itself was trying to speak to them, to draw them into its depths. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "You hear it too, don't you?" Jorin stood behind her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Layla nodded, not taking her eyes off the horizon. "I hear it. But we can't let it distract us." Jorin moved closer, his voice low. "It's not just a distraction. It's a warning. We're pushing too far into the unknown. This ocean, it's alive, and it doesn't want us here." Layla gripped the wheel tighter, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I know what I'm doing, Jorin. We're on the edge of something incredible. We just have to push through. The lost continent is out there, and we're closer than ever." Jorin sighed, his hand resting on the railing. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just another story, like the ones we grew up hearing. Maybe the call is trying to tell us that some places are meant to stay lost." Layla turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "I didn't come all this way to turn back now. We've faced monsters, storms, and our own fears to get here. I'm not giving up because of a sound." Jorin studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Layla. Sometimes, the ocean takes more than you're willing to give." He left her alone at the helm, the weight of his words lingering in the air. But Layla pushed them aside, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. She adjusted the sails, feeling the tension in the air, knowing that the next few days would be crucial. The following morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, something appeared in the distance. It was faint at first, a shimmering line barely visible through the morning mist. Layla's heart raced as she leaned forward, gripping the wheel. "Amen," she shouted, her voice hoarse with excitement. The old sailor was at her side in moments, his sharp eyes narrowing as he peered into the distance. "What is it?" I think it's land." Amen said nothing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The crew gathered on deck, murmuring in disbelief. For so long, they had sailed through an endless expanse of ocean, with nothing but water and sky to guide them. The thought of land, of solid ground, seemed almost impossible, but as the ship drew closer, the shimmering line solidified into the unmistakable shape of a distant shore. Jagged cliffs rose from the sea, their surfaces covered in strange, glowing moss that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, a place untouched by time or human hands. Layla felt her chest tighten as they neared the shore. This was it. The lost continent. The sea breaker sailed into a natural harbor, its enchanted sails glowing faintly as it coasted to a stop. The crew lowered the anchor, their faces a mix of awe and apprehension. They had made it, after weeks of sailing, fighting off sea monsters, and resisting the call. They had finally found the legendary land. But as Layla stepped off the ship and onto the rocky shore, she felt a strange unease settle over her. The air was thick with magic, an ancient power that hummed through the ground beneath her feet. This place was alive, in a way the islands had never been. And it was watching them. "Spread out," she ordered, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "We need to see what we can find. Be careful, and stay within sight of the ship." The crew obeyed, fanning out across the rocky terrain. Layla and Eamon moved together, their eyes scanning the strange landscape. The glowing moss covered everything, casting an eerie light over the ruins of what must have once been a great civilization. Crumbling buildings, overgrown with vines and moss, stood in silent testament to a forgotten past. "It's like a graveyard," Eamon murmured, his voice low. Layla nodded, her eyes narrowing as she approached a massive stone structure at the center of the ruins. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, tall and imposing, its surface etched with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with life. As they stepped closer, the call grew louder, echoing off the stone walls and filling the air with a palpable energy. Layla felt it pulling her forward, urging her to reach out and touch the stone. Without thinking, she placed her hand on the cold surface. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of power coursed through her, knocking her back. She stumbled, gasping for breath as the call roared in her ears, louder than ever before. "Layla!" Eamon caught her before she could fall, his eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" Layla shook her head, struggling to regain her composure. It's the heart of the ocean. It's here." Eamon frowned, his gaze shifting to the stone structure. "The heart? You think it's real?" Layla nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it. The heart of the ocean, it's the source of the call. It's been waiting for us." Eamon's expression darkened. "Then we need to be careful. If the legends are true, the heart holds incredible power. But that kind of power comes with a price." Layla knew he was right. The heart of the ocean was said to control the magic of the seas, to command the very creatures that had held humanity captive for so long. But she also knew that they had no choice. If they were to survive, to free their people from the tyranny of the ocean, they would need the heart. As they stood before the ancient stone, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air grew thick with energy, and the call reached a deafening crescendo. Layla gripped her sword, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the moss. He moved with a strange grace, his voice low and hypnotic as he spoke. "You have come for the heart," he said, his gaze fixed on Layla. "But you do not understand its power. It is not something that can be tamed by mortal hands." Layla raised her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "We don't seek to tame it. We seek to restore balance." The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Balance? There is no balance here. The ocean is chaos, and it will consume you just as it has consumed all who came before." Eamon stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "We didn't come here to die. We came here to survive." The man's smile faded, his expression turning cold. "Then you will need more than courage. The heart will test you, and not all will survive its trial." Before Layla could respond, the ground beneath them cracked open, and the world seemed to tilt. The stone structure glowed brighter, its power surging outward in waves. Layla felt herself being pulled into the heart, her mind spinning as the call reached its peak. Everything went dark. When Layla opened her eyes, she was standing on the deck of the sea breaker once more. The ocean was calm, the horizon stretching endlessly before her. But something had changed. The call was gone, and in its place was a deep, abiding silence. She turned to Eamon, who stood beside her, his expression somber. "Did we? We survived," he said quietly. But the others, Layla's heart sank as she realized what he meant. The crew, her friends, her companions, they were gone. Lost to the heart's trial, but they had made it. They had found the lost continent, and they had survived the heart's test. Now, it was up to them to return to the islands, to share the knowledge they had gained and to rebuild their world. As the sea breaker sailed into the distance, Layla stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of hope. They had defied the ocean, faced its monsters, and emerged victorious. The endless ocean had called to them, but it had not broken them.